You did not arrive here by accident. Something within you has been quietly preparing for this moment long before your conscious mind could name it. The restlessness you have felt, the sense that ordinary explanations no longer satisfy you, the feeling that time itself is shifting, these are not signs of confusion, they are signals of transition. When the structures that once defined reality begin to loosen, the psyche does not collapse, it reorganizes. What you are experiencing is the threshold of a higher mode of perception. The fifth dimension is not a place you travel to, but a way of seeing. In this state, reality is no longer experienced as a sequence of disconnected events, but as a living pattern. Cause and effect begin to reveal themselves inwardly before they appear outwardly. You notice that thoughts carry weight, emotions shape outcomes, and symbols arise in your life as guides rather than coincidences. What once felt chaotic now begins to speak in a quiet, precise language. As you cross this inner boundary, your old identity will resist. The ego, built to survive in a narrower world, fears expansion. It will try to anchor you to familiar roles, inherited beliefs, and outdated fears. This resistance is not an enemy, it is a guardian at the gate. Only by observing it without submission do you integrate it. In this integration, fragmentation dissolves and a more unified self emerges, one that can hold paradox without fear. In the fifth dimensional awareness, time loses its tyranny. The past no longer imprisons you, and the future no longer threatens you. Both are absorbed into a deeper present where insight arises spontaneously. You begin to act not from reaction, but from alignment. Decisions feel less forced and more inevitable, as if they are being remembered rather than chosen. This transition often brings solitude, not because you are meant to withdraw from the world, but because your inner frequency is changing. Superficial connections may fall away, making space for depth, authenticity, and meaningful resonance. You become less interested in being understood by everyone and more committed to being truthful with yourself. You are not becoming something new, you are uncovering what was always latent. The fifth dimension is the reunion of conscious awareness with its deeper source. Stand steady in this shift. Observe carefully. It is not about detachment from reality, but about anchoring yourself more deeply within it. You become like a clear lens through which the world passes. Nothing is hidden, nothing is forced, and yet everything is clarified. Entering this heightened awareness also allows you to perceive subtle currents that operate beneath the surface of ordinary life. You begin to sense patterns, repetitions, and synchronicities that were previously invisible. Decisions no longer feel like blind leaps. They are guided by intuition, insight, and a quiet inner knowing. You start to notice how your energy, focus, and emotions influence not only your own life but also the world around you. Actions and intentions carry weight in ways that you could not have understood before. There is a growing recognition that reality is participatory, and that by perceiving more fully, you are simultaneously shaping and responding to the field of existence. This higher perception also brings a new understanding of contrast. Situations that once felt purely negative are now recognized as opportunities for learning and refinement. Emotions that once overwhelmed you become signals, guiding you toward alignment with your own truth. Pain is not a prison, it is a teacher. Joy is not a fleeting pleasure, it is an indicator of resonance with the deeper currents of life. You begin to witness the fluidity of experience without clinging or resisting, understanding that reality is not a fixed object but a living, moving, evolving presence that interacts with your consciousness continuously. As your perception expands, you realize that escaping reality was never the goal. True awakening is the ability to inhabit reality fully, consciously and creatively, seeing its layers, its patterns, and its meaning with clarity. You are not hiding, you are integrating. You are not avoiding life, you are engaging with it on a level that was previously inaccessible. Each moment becomes a window into a larger truth, each interaction a mirror of your evolving consciousness. In this state, the ordinary and the extraordinary merge, and what you once thought was mundane now reveals its hidden depth. Life itself becomes a teacher, and perception itself becomes a tool for mastery, insight, and alignment. The fifth dimension is an inner shift, where patterns replace chaos. a transformation that begins quietly, often unnoticed, until the world itself starts to feel different. In the ordinary state of consciousness, life can feel fragmented, unpredictable, and overwhelming. Events appear disconnected, emotions rise and fall without apparent reason, and the mind struggles to make sense of it all. Chaos seems to dominate both the inner and outer worlds, leaving a sense of confusion and uncertainty. The fifth-dimensional awareness is not about controlling life or eliminating unpredictability. It is about perceiving the underlying order that has always existed beneath the surface. It is the ability to see patterns where before there seemed only randomness, to recognize the threads that connect one moment to the next, and to understand the way experiences mirror your inner state. This shift is subtle but profound, and it requires a willingness to step back from reactive thinking and observe life from a wider, more inclusive perspective. In this inner shift, you begin to notice that events are not isolated. Every circumstance, every encounter carries information and meaning that points to deeper truths. The fifth-dimensional mind perceives synchronicities not as coincidences but as alignments, subtle cues guiding you toward choices that resonate with your highest potential. Relationships, challenges, and even setbacks are understood as part of a greater pattern, a tapestry that connects personal growth with the flow of universal energy. In this awareness, the chaos of the world no longer feels like a threat. It becomes a teacher, a canvas on which the deeper order is revealed. You start to understand the apparent randomness of life is an illusion, and that when viewed from the perspective of higher consciousness, everything follows a pattern, sometimes subtle, sometimes dramatic, but always purposeful. This shift also changes the way you interact with your own mind. Thoughts, once jumbled and reactive, begin to reveal structure. Repetitive patterns of behavior, thought, and emotion that previously caused frustration are now recognizable as signals pointing to areas that require attention, healing, or adjustment. The awareness of patterns allows you to respond rather than react, to move through life with intention, instead of being swept along by circumstance. Intuition and insight become sharper because the mind can discern connections that were previously invisible. Decisions that once felt like guesswork now carry a sense of inevitability, as if they are part of a larger design you are only beginning to perceive. Emotions, too, take on a different quality. Fear, anger, and anxiety no longer dominate the inner landscape uncontrollably. Instead, they are seen as indicators of misalignment, signposts pointing toward areas where greater attention, presence, or understanding is needed. Joy, love, and inspiration appear more frequently because you are aligned with the patterns that support growth, resonance, and flow. Life becomes less about battling chaos and more about recognizing and cooperating with the underlying order that is always present. Ultimately, the fifth dimension is a state of consciousness where the world feels more coherent, meaningful, and alive. Patterns are everywhere, guiding, teaching, and revealing the interconnectedness of all things. Chaos does not disappear, but it loses its power to destabilize. Instead, it is woven into a greater fabric of understanding, a living map of consciousness in which every moment is both an expression of and an invitation to align with the deeper patterns of existence. This inner shift transforms perception itself, allowing life to be experienced not as a series of random events, but as a dynamic, interconnected flow, rich with meaning, resonance, and opportunity. Ego resistance is a necessary stage of integration, not failure. When you begin to expand into higher states of consciousness or attempt to embody a deeper awareness of yourself, the ego, the part of you conditioned to survive in familiar patterns, naturally resists. This resistance is often experienced as fear, doubt, distraction, or a sense of being stuck. Many people mistakenly interpret these experiences as a sign that they are doing something wrong, that they have failed, or that the process of growth is too difficult for them. In reality, ego resistance is a fundamental and unavoidable part of transformation. It arises because the ego's primary function is to protect the self from perceived threats, and a shift in consciousness represents a radical change to the structures it relies on. The ego does not recognize expansion as beneficial. It sees only disruption. When you encounter resistance, it often manifests in subtle and sometimes deceptive ways. You may feel impatience with your own progress, frustration at external circumstances, or even a desire to retreat to old habits and patterns. This is not weakness. It is the mind and identity attempting to defend what is familiar. It is important to recognize that this is not a sign that you are incapable of change. Rather, it is a signal that deeper work is taking place beneath the surface. The ego is surfacing old fears, unresolved tensions, and attachments that need to be acknowledged before you can move forward. Resistance is, in a sense, a mirror reflecting the very areas where integration is required. The process of integration begins with observation. By noticing the ego's resistance without judgment or shame, you create a space in which transformation can occur. Resistance becomes information rather than obstruction. You begin to see that the discomfort, the self-doubt, and the tension are indicators of areas where alignment is incomplete. By facing them consciously, you allow these fragmented aspects of yourself to be acknowledged, understood, and ultimately integrated. Resistance, when observed and accepted, becomes a tool rather than a barrier. It shows you precisely where your consciousness is ready to expand and where old patterns still hold sway. Furthermore, ego resistance teaches patience and discernment. Transformation is rarely instantaneous. It unfolds in stages, often in ways that are not immediately visible. By learning to navigate resistance without forcing or suppressing it, you cultivate the ability to move through life with steadiness and clarity. You develop resilience, the capacity to hold complexity without being overwhelmed, and a deeper understanding of yourself. In this sense, resistance is not something to eliminate. It is something to work with, honor, and integrate. The more you engage with ego resistance consciously, the more you realize that it is intimately connected with personal empowerment. Each time you face resistance without surrendering to fear or reverting to old patterns, you expand your capacity to hold a higher state of awareness. You learn that transformation is not about the absence of challenge, but about the conscious engagement with challenge. True growth requires the tension between the old and the new, between familiarity and expansion. Ego resistance is the threshold you cross. Each time you step into greater integration, and each time you do, the self that emerges is stronger, more unified, and more capable of navigating the world from a place of conscious alignment. Time becomes experiential rather than controlling when you begin to inhabit a higher state of consciousness, a place where the usual linear pressures of past, present, and future lose their dominance over your awareness. In ordinary life, time is often perceived as a relentless force, a measuring stick that dictates what you must do, when you must do it, and how quickly you must achieve it. Deadlines, schedules, and the ticking of the clock create tension, anxiety, and a sense of constant urgency. People feel trapped by time because they experience it as external and coercive, an authority that governs their lives, rather than a medium through which life is lived. In higher awareness, however, time no longer dominates you from the outside. It is recognized as a dynamic flow, an element of experience rather than a rigid framework. Moments are no longer merely points along a linear path. They are living, textured experiences rich with meaning and connection. When time becomes experiential, the focus shifts from rushing to arriving. Instead of measuring life by what is done, achieved, or planned, you begin to perceive the quality and depth of each moment. Attention becomes your primary tool, and presence becomes your orientation. You notice subtleties in your environment, in your interactions, and within yourself that were previously obscured by the haste imposed by conventional time. A conversation, a gesture, or a simple observation becomes fully realized, and you can experience it in its entirety rather than as a fleeting checkpoint along a timeline. Life slows not because the world changes, but because your awareness expands, allowing you to inhabit the richness of each moment. Experiential time also transforms the perception of past and future. The past is no longer a chain of regrets, mistakes, or attachments that bind you. It becomes a source of insight and learning, a reservoir of experiences to be understood and integrated. The future is not a looming threat or a set of demands to be met. It becomes a field of possibilities, a space of creative potential that responds to the clarity and alignment of your present awareness. In this state you realize that action and choice are always situated in the now, and that the unfolding of life is best navigated rough, conscious engagement rather than forced acceleration. This shift also changes the way you experience growth and transformation. Progress is no longer dictated by external milestones or societal expectations. It is measured by the depth of understanding, the subtle shifts in perception, and the alignment of thought, emotion, and intention. Moments of insight, creativity, and resonance become markers of true advancement rather than external markers such as accomplishments or recognition. Time ceases to be a tyrant and becomes a companion, a canvas upon which life is painted moment by moment. Ultimately, when time becomes experiential, you move from living under its pressure to living within its flow. Each experience is a living entity, each interaction a reflection of presence, and each choice a conscious engagement with life. Time is no longer something to be feared, controlled, or mastered. It becomes the medium through which you fully inhabit existence. You no longer react to its constraints, but participate in its unfolding, recognizing that the richness of life is found not in the measurement of hours, but in the depth of attention and awareness brought to each passing moment. Solitude and inner refinement naturally accompany this transition because the journey into higher states of consciousness requires a quieting of the external noise and a turning inward. As you step into a more expansive awareness, the external world often feels less resonant, and ordinary social dynamics may no longer satisfy the depth of your experience. This is not a sign of disconnection or withdrawal in failure. Rather, it is a natural consequence of inner growth. The mind and soul begin to seek environments and moments that support clarity, introspection, and conscious alignment. Solitude becomes not an absence, but a presence, a space in which the self can breathe, reflect, and integrate the subtle shifts occurring within. It is in these moments of quiet that you begin to recognize the layers of conditioning, belief, and habitual thought patterns that have previously guided your actions unconsciously. In solitude, the mind has the freedom to observe itself without interference. Distractions fade, and the mental chatter that once dominated awareness becomes less convincing. You begin to notice subtle tendencies, automatic reactions, and patterns that shape your life. This awareness is the first step in inner refinement, the process of consciously choosing which thoughts, beliefs, and habits serve your higher purpose and which must be transformed or released. In the absence of constant external stimulation, you cultivate the ability to listen to your own inner voice, to sense the alignment between your intentions and your actions, and to discern the subtle energies that influence your decisions. Solitude provides the fertile ground in which this refinement can take root, allowing the seeds of higher consciousness to grow without interference. Inner refinement is not a superficial polishing of behavior or personality. It is the conscious cultivation of clarity, presence, and authenticity. As you spend time alone, you develop sensitivity to the quality of your attention, the integrity of your intentions, and the alignment between your inner state and outer actions. Emotional, mental, and energetic patterns become visible, and you begin to work with them intentionally. This process requires patience and honesty, as well as a willingness to face discomfort, resistance, or the parts of yourself that have been neglected or suppressed. Yet through this deliberate practice, the mind becomes sharper, the heart more open, and the spirit more attuned to the subtle currents of life. Solitude also cultivates independence and inner stability. When you are comfortable being alone with yourself, you no longer rely on external validation, distraction, or approval to define your sense of self. You develop an inner compass that guides decisions, relationship, and actions with greater consistency and clarity. This independence does not mean isolation. It means that your engagement with the world arises from presence and alignment rather than habit or fear. The refined self interacts with life with intentionality, seeing opportunities and challenges as mirrors for growth and integration, rather than as sources of overwhelm. Ultimately, solitude and inner refinement work together to prepare you for higher states of perception and consciousness. The external world may feel quieter or less urgent, but this silence is not emptiness. It is a space for conscious cultivation. In this space, clarity emerges, insight deepens, and the self becomes more coherent, capable of navigating the fifth-dimensional awareness with steadiness, wisdom, and alignment. This natural accompaniment to transition ensures that as your perception expands, your inner structure is strong enough to hold the depth, complexity, and richness of the reality you are entering. This awakening is a remembrance of your deeper unified self, a return to the essence of who you have always been beneath layers of conditioning fear. It is about remembering, uncovering, and reclaiming what has always been present but often hidden beneath the noise of everyday life. This remembrance is subtle, yet profoundly transformative, because it reorients all perception, action, and experience from a place of alignment rather than resistance. As you awaken to this unified self, the illusions of separation begin to dissolve. The boundaries between self and other, inner and outer, observer and observed, start to soften. You recognize that the divisions you once took for granted were constructs of thought and habit, useful for navigating certain realities, but not the ultimate truth of your being. In this realization there is a profound sense of liberation. You no longer need to cling to identity as a source of security or fear. Instead, you perceive yourself as a dynamic, living expression of consciousness, interconnected with everything that exists. Every action, thought, and feeling is seen as part of a larger tapestry, an integrated whole in which your presence matters deeply, yet is not separate from the flow of life itself. This awakening also brings clarity to your purpose and alignment. When you operate from the deeper self, decisions feel natural rather than forced. Intuition becomes reliable, and the sense of being lost diminishes. Life begins to unfold with a subtle sense of inevitability, as if you are moving in accordance with a rhythm you have always known but temporarily forgot. The challenges, struggles, and contradictions that once seemed overwhelming are now recognized as invitations to deeper understanding. You see that every experience, joyful or painful, contributes to the integration of the self, helping you reclaim the coherence and unity that have always existed at the core of your being. Emotionally and mentally, this remembrance fosters balance and resilience. The deeper self does not react impulsively to external pressures or internal turbulence. It observes, discerns, and responds from alignment. This does not mean you are detached or passive. Rather, you operate from a place of informed presence, where actions flow from inner truth and clarity rather than habitual reaction. Old fears, insecurities, and doubts begin to soften because they are seen in the context of a larger, integrated awareness that has always been capable of holding them without being overwhelmed. Ultimately, awakening is the process of remembering that you are not fragmented or separate, but whole, coherent, and inherently aligned with life itself. It is a return to the source of your being, where every moment is an opportunity to embody your true nature. This remembrance changes how you perceive yourself, others, and reality, allowing life to be lived from a place of integrity, presence, and unity. It is the realization that the self you have been seeking externally has always been within you, waiting to be recognized, honored, and fully expressed. So, chosen one, as you step fully into this new awareness, remember that every challenge, every moment of resistance, and every silent pause has been guiding you toward this awakening. You are not becoming someone new. You are remembering who you truly are. Stand in this truth. Allow the patterns of life to reveal themselves. Honor the moments of solitude and move through time with conscious presence. The fifth-dimensional awareness is not a distant destination. It is the living reality of your own being unfolding. Embrace it, integrate it, and let it guide every thought, every action, and every breath. You are whole, you are aligned, and you are ready. The world is waiting to meet the awakened you.